So I'm looking forward to tonight. Thank you, Rabbi Elaine.
Oh, thank you so much. We are so happy and so excited to welcome Lauren Hofing, and helping us make sure our evening runs smoothly is our fantastic Zoom guru, Bob Mizell. So thank you so much also for making sure that our speaker is spotlighted, our videos are shown, and that everything runs smoothly tonight. So let's get started. If I could ask you, I'm gonna recommend that everybody maybe go to, when you go to the top of your screen, you have the choice between gallery view and speaker view. So I'm gonna recommend that you hit speaker view so that you'll be able to focus more clearly on Lauren when she's speaking, just for a minute or two here and there, me as well, but primarily on Lauren. Lauren is a resident of Lakewood Ranch, a member of Temple Emanu-El, wife, mother, realtor, and beekeeper. And we are so excited to have her with us and to hear from her tonight. And I'm going to start by asking her a few questions so we can engage in just a conversation, learn more about her and more about her vocation and how it relates to these coming high holidays. Lauren, I'm going to ask you first, hi, just please, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us about where you're from, about your work, about your involvement in Temple Emanu-El, your family, just any facts that you'd like to share aside from beekeeping so we can start getting to know you a little bit.
Well, I first want to say thank you so much to Rabbi Elaine for organizing this event. You are incredible. Your dedication and support is wonderful, and your marketing outstanding. So thank you so much. But I am originally from Michigan, and I went to Michigan State University. I studied food science and human nutrition, and I think that's where I first got really interested in our food sources and how it affects us, and just overall the science behind food. I graduated from Michigan State and I left 1 month later for the Peace Corps. And that's really where I first got involved, or put the buzz in my head about bees, although I didn't do anything there with it. But I am a realtor, as you mentioned. I'm a mother of two. My son Noah is 16 and my daughter Eliana is 14. And we live in Lakewood Ranch. We moved here 3 years ago from Chicago, where we had lived for many, many years. And that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Good, that's a great nutshell, thank you. Would you tell us, I know you spoke about this a little bit in the East County Observer article, and I found it so great and so just amusing and fun. Tell us about how you first were drawn to beekeeping, and specifically how you became a beekeeper.
So I first, like I mentioned, was in the Peace Corps. And when I went over there, I was a health extensionist was my title. And I thought they would have a job for me. And I got there and was like, well, what would you like to do? And they gave me a list of things. And I thought, wow, beekeeping sounds really cool. But I knew nothing about beekeeping. So that was kind of off the table for me. So I did fill myself with other projects that were also engaging and wonderful. But I did think that beekeeping would be a wonderful thing for a third world country to learn how to harvest honey. It would be a project for women or men actually to sell at the markets and things like that. So unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do that there, but it always kind of stuck with me in the back of my head that it was so interesting and I wanted to learn more. And it wasn't until years later, after being a mother and feeling like I didn't really have a hobby or anything of my own, that I kind of revisited the beekeeping idea. And I took a class when we lived in Chicago, and it was during the fall or winter, so there really wasn't any practical hands-on learning, but I did sit through a class and I got further interested in it. And then when we moved here, probably 10 years after I took the class, we moved during my birthday, which was not so much fun. But shortly after we arrived, my husband said to me, hey, put on some long pants and a long sleeve shirt. I want to take you to your birthday present. So we were driving for a while. We wound up in Palmetto or Parrish somewhere. I don't even remember. But we pulled into this lot and there were hundreds of beehives there. And I was so excited. I thought, oh my goodness, I get to work a day in a beehive. And he said, no, you actually, I just bought you a beehive. which threw me into a panic because I did not know what to do with it and where I was going to keep it and so on and so forth. So that was the beginning of my beekeeping.
Oh, that's such a fun story. I love it. I love picturing your face as you realize, that where you are, that you're going to be, among all these bees, and wait a second, one of these is going to be mine. Thank you. If I could ask you about some of your early experiences, learning beekeeping, kind of that transition between, being interested in beekeeping, learning about beekeeping, actually becoming a beekeeper. If there was anything that was especially inspiring, anything funny, maybe even something treacherous that's not too traumatic to share. We'd love to hear about some of your early experiences.
So feet to the fire, learn to beekeep hands-on. I'm not going to lie. I read Beekeeping for Dummies and from cover to cover, just trying to figure out what I was doing. The gentleman that we bought the bees from was wonderful though. And he said, why don't you just come out and work with me for, a few weeks until you find out where you want to take the hive. And he gave me a list of things I needed to order pretty much immediately off of Amazon, including a veil and a hive tool and a smoker and all the other things that I needed. So it was really just kind of, like I said, feet to the fire. I was bound and determined to figure it out or they were going to die. So I just learned very quickly, and thanks to YouTube, watched a lot of videos. The most treacherous thing would probably be the day that or I should say the night that I moved the hive from where he had them to where they are still to this day. And you have to move a hive after nighttime, and they weigh probably, depending on how large they are, but my hive probably weighed anywhere between 60 and 80 pounds, and I wasn't sure how I was going to move them, but yep, put them in the back of my car after dark and drove them to their new location. And I really was driving down I-75 thinking, what am I doing? And I did manage to get them to their new home, get them set up, and made it home without a sting. But I was standing in the kitchen telling my husband about this whole event, and a little bee started walking out of my shirt. So, I calmly walked outside and let her free, but that was my probably most harrowing experience.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is a great experience. Thank you for sharing it. I wanted to ask you, when we first started talking about the possibility of having this event, I asked you just really casually, I said, so what are some interesting things? Like, I don't know anything about bees except what I learned in elementary school, that they are insects and that they can sting. And I just said, what are some things that are interesting about bees? And it was so much fun to learn from you. And it was so great to see just how interested you were in the question, and just to have these fascinating facts just kind of come forth. So I wanted to ask you just to reprise that, if you wouldn't mind. We could ask you just, what are some of the most fascinating things that you've learned about bees and about bee society?
I think that overall, bee society is probably the most fascinating thing to me. How the whole hive works and they work together, and that it's mostly a female dominated society. They do have male bees, but they are drones, and their sole purpose is to mate with the female bees. They don't do any of the other foraging, any of the building out of the cells. They don't do really anything else. They don't care for the queen. They really don't serve any purpose other than reproducing the colony, and not even their own colony. But I find it fascinating. They really do have an intricate way of communicating, and they also do things that are interesting to me, like housekeeping, which is just kind of fascinating. The first time I ever saw that, I wasn't quite sure. I thought maybe my bees had been poisoned because they were doing this little intricate forward movement, backward movement, forward movement, backward movement, and they were all doing it in unison across the front entrance of the hive. And I had to Google it and YouTube it to figure out what was going on. I really did think that they were poisoned by pesticide. And what it was is they were just housekeeping. They call it, now I'm blanking because I'm on Zoom and I can't think when I'm talking all at the same time, but the term will come to me. But they just do everything. I mean, they are in tune with their queen. They are run by pheromones. They are run by they do intricate dances called waggle dances to communicate with each other, in addition to buzzes. And It's overall just fascinating to me how they have reproduced and survived over all these years, despite some struggles.
It's so inspiring, you know, in some ways too, just to think about it like that, to think about, you know, the society and the cleaning. And that must have been so frightening for you just to see them doing something and having no idea, you know, what they were doing and if they were in danger, and then to find out that it's just a part of their society also. Thank you. I'm going to ask you this later on in the conversation also, I know. So this is like just, you know, part one of Bee Facts. I'm really excited to show this video that you, and I believe your daughter, right, was kind enough to come and to help you put together. So we're going to be watching a video about the work of a beekeeper in just a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you first, if you could just kind of take us verbally through what we're going to see, kind of verbally, just a day, if you would, like a day in the life of a beekeeper.
Well, I generally go to my hives. I'm going to preface this by saying my daughter will come out to the hives with me, but did not make it out. So my disclaimer is I'm not a cinematographer or a public speaker, so be kind when you're watching the video in your critique. But generally, I check on my hives every 7 to 10 days, and I generally start by doing an observation as I approach the hives, just to see what activity is happening in front of the hive. I also want to say I started with the one hive, and I now have 7 hives. So, and you'll see them on the video. But I do a visual observation just to see what's happening and how they're doing outside the hive, because you can tell a lot about what's happening inside the hive by what's happening outside the hive. But then I will smoke them a little bit, and I will take the lid off, and I will check. And there is only one queen in each hive, and a lot of people will go through the hive until they find the queen, and I do not do that. I go through the hive looking for signs of the queen. So as long as I see eggs and larvae and capped brood and honey stores and pollen stores, I assume that the hive is doing well and it's healthy, and I usually close it up and move on. I just figure the more I dig around in there, the more detriment I'm doing to the hive. And that was not a lesson I learned quickly. It took me probably a year before I felt comfortable just kind of observing slightly rather than digging all the way through a hive.
That's interesting. The trial and error. Was there a moment when you decided, wait a second, this is, you know, I need to change my ways, or was it just sort of like gradually as you learned more and more about what you were doing and kind of adopted best practices?
I am always changing my ways. I am always learning. I wish that there was a set, you know, way of doing beekeeping, but there is not, and every beekeeper probably has their own opinion on things. I recently had the apiary inspector for Manatee County come out, and one of the questions she asked me was, what do I do for mite treatment? Because the varroa mite is a big issue for the honeybees, and I don't do any treatment. I am a natural beekeeper. I don't put any chemicals or treatments in my hives. So I have to do other management. Some of it is, you know, figuring out how to have the queen do a brood break, which is sometimes successful and sometimes not. So a lot of it is trial and error. But there have been times when I have really questioned. It gets overwhelming. I mean, if you can imagine, I'm in a suit and it's very hot in there, and I overheat rather quickly. And if a hive is not happy, they will let you know. And there have been times that I've been there and bees are just kind of bouncing off of my veil, and it's overwhelming. There are times when I'm like, I don't know that I could do this, but I push through, and I've, you know, managed to get past it. So
thank you. Well, I want to say, I know, you know, we're going to talk about the relationship between the high holidays and about beekeeping, you know, mostly in the context of honey, which we'll talk about more after we watch a video. But when you said, I'm always changing my ways, and, you know, you said always the idea of, you know, always learning and always changing and always renewing. I know we didn't rehearse that or anything, but it just, it really hit me that, that kind of just that constant journey of knowing what you want to do and knowing what you want to achieve and how you want things to be, but being willing to make those changes and to be open to new ideas and to learning in order to get there. That's a beautiful holiday message. So thank you. In just a second, Bob, I'm going to ask you to share the screen and to run the video. But first, could I ask you, Lauren, is there anything you'd like for us to know before we watch a video? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I've gotten to see it. And I know you said to be kind as we're judging it, but I think everyone's going to love it because it's really terrific. But is there anything that we should know in advance before we watch it that you want us to know?
No, just that I talk about some things in the video that may be difficult to see on the video, but if you wait till the end, I have done some screenshots of the things that I talk about so that you might have a better chance of seeing what I was trying to describe.
Great. Okay.
That helps.
And we'll have time, people who are watching, if you have questions about something that, you know, Lauren has said, or you want to learn more, we're going to have 2 different times for questions. The first time will be right after the video, because we imagine people are going to have questions about her work after seeing the video, and then again at the end of her talk. So if you have a question, you're welcome to hang on to it if you want, or you can also put it into the chat. Bob is being kind enough to moderate the chat and to monitor, so he'll see your question. So if you have a question during the video or anything you've heard so far, pop it in the chat. And Bob, if I could ask you to share your screen, and we're all going to be treated to a view of Lauren Hofing's beehives and the hands-on work of a beekeeper.
Hi, it's Lauren Hofing, and I'm out in East Manatee at my apiary, and today I'm going to teach you a little bit about beekeeping. I'm going to do an inspection and take you through the hive and show you a few things. Hopefully you can learn something interesting that you didn't know before about bees. Usually analyze a little bit, I just watch the bees to see what they're doing and make sure that everything looks good coming and going from the hives. And you can see this is all great activity, but I did notice that there's something interesting going on over here that I wanted to show. If you look at this hive and the way that they are flying in front of the hive, if you watch it closely, it kind of looks like a figure 8 pattern. They're just kind of bumbling around in the front. And that is called an orientation flight. And what it is baby bees learning how to flight and navigate outside of the hive. So I find it fascinating, but if you look at that one compared to maybe these over here, they're just coming in and out. They're just going about their business. Okay, so this is one of my newer hives. Let's see what we find. I did take the ratchet strap off already, which I do ratchet them down because of wild animals, and there's some cows and horses sometimes in this field that I keep them in, and they rub against it sometimes, and also if we get high winds, I just like to keep it all together. So this is one of my newer hives. This is me, all bundled up in my gear. I do like to protect myself. I have been stung, but I try to avoid it. So first thing I'm going to do, I got my smoker going. I'm going to smoke the bees a little bit. And that just signals them to kind of get into the hive, grab some honey maybe, and just, they think it calms them a little bit. They just fill their bellies with honey, and it makes them a little bit more docile generally when I go in there, not always. But you can give them a second. And so this is an outer cover, and I have an inner cover here. That the bees often propolis together, stick it to the hive for further protection so other insects can get in or rain doesn't get in. If you can see, there are lots of bees crawling on the lid. I'll bring them a little closer. Maybe you can get a close-up look at some bees. Now I did see some hive beetles, which is something that I'm going to squash if I see them, but generally the bees will take care of them. But all this right around here, this is propolis, which is tree resin that the bees use as kind of a mortar in their hive to seal things, whether there's a hole or oftentimes there's a hive beetle right there, or they just use it as protection. If you can see, I don't know if you can see, they're all kind of congregating at the top here. This is a beetle blaster, that little hive beetle that I killed. I put that in there hoping that they will chase the beetles into there and they can't get out. But these the center frames right here are generally where a queen will lay her eggs, and the bees will work a hive from the inside frames to the outer frames. So I'm going to start by just taking out some of these frames just to get a look and see what's going on, and I will fill you in as I go. So this frame, not much is happening on. They haven't even started building out any comb on it really. So I'm just going to set this one aside. Same with this next one. There's not much going on in this one. Well, they are actually starting to build a little comb on this one, and I could tell because they gather together. They're starting to build a little bit of comb over here, and they have wax glands, and that's where they build their combs, and they build as they need more room. Oh, actually, now that I look at it, there's actually some nectar in there, so they're collecting nectar from something to make honey. I don't know if you can see. The lighting is right, but you can see some glistening at the bottom of those cells. And I'll show you different things that are happening in the cells. Okay, so this frame is interesting. I just want to make sure that the queen is not on this frame because I don't want to lose her anywhere. Oh, there she is too. I don't know if you can see, there's like a big fat one walking. I don't know where she went to the other side. I don't want to lose her. She is the heart of this hive. Oh. But this one is interesting. If you look closely in there, there's different things going on. There's some eggs. There's some, you can see some capped brood. I'll try and point that out. There's the capped brood, which looks wet. But the queen is on this frame, so I don't want to keep it out too long. Wish I could find her again. But what they're doing is they are, as the bees are hatching, they're filling it with nectar, which means something is blooming. I think it might be goldenrod. So I do try to go as low as possible so that I don't kill any bees. It does happen I squish some sometimes. And they're all going so. Sometimes they start getting a little agitated. Sometimes it's hard to get the frames out because they propolis things. You always have to be careful not to kill the queen because then Hive goes into a tizzy and they have to either recreate a queen or they will die. So this one's pretty too. This is filled with capped brood, which is baby bees. They go from an egg to larva to a capped brood where they turn into bees, and you can see hive because obviously something is blooming. There is one bee, I don't know if we can see her up here. She's got pollen on her legs. She's got yellow pollen. I don't know if I got the camera right, but she is bringing in pollen and pollen, they pack into these cells also, and they mix it with an enzyme in their saliva, and they make what they call bee bread, and they feed that to the baby bees. And so this one, there she is right in the center, right there, walking around with some pollen pants on. But this one too, as the bees are hatching, they're filling it with honey. So that is a good sign. But all those capped ones where it's like a light brown capping are baby bees being born. Well, not born, but so this one, I'm going to try and get a close-up on this. You can see the larva in some of these eggs. I don't know if I'm getting the right spots. But that's just a different stage from the time eggs. Eggs are really hard to see. They're like little tiny grain of rice in there. But then they turn into some larvae. There's like, I don't know if it's, in the suit to see if I'm getting the right spots. I'm gonna close up this hive because I think we're doing well. I'd like to find some capped honey somewhere, and I'd like to show you that. But if I find anything interesting in one of the other hives, I will continue with showing things. I come out every week to 10 days or so and just check out them. I don't always go through the hives completely, but you can tell a lot about what's going on in the hives by observing what's happening outside of the hives.
Mm.
There's the queen. Queen mother.
That's the honey that she sells.
Wow.
Wow. That was amazing, Lauren.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that.
It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. It was really a treat. Thank you. I've gotten to see it before and I loved seeing it again. Actually, we're going to let everybody just kind of, I was inspired by my husband. Just a round of applause for our beekeeper and for that glimpse into your work. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We had a lot, I know people were curious, and as soon as I suggested people start putting their questions in the chat, I feel like the floodgates opened up. We have so many questions that people would like to ask Lauren. Let's see, Bob, maybe what I'll do, if this is okay, I can access the chat. Could I ask you, Bob, just to be in charge of unmuting the people or asking people to unmute themselves?
Yeah.
if they have questions after the chat. But for now, we'll just take the ones that were in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see. I believe we have one from Joan's iPad 2. How does the queen become the queen? That's a really good question. How does a queen become the queen?
That is a really good question. There is only one queen per hive, and she is chosen by the bees. Another fascinating thing in their society. When a queen lays an egg, if she is failing or at the end of her life, or they want to supersede her, when she lays an egg, they will choose certain eggs based on criteria that I have no idea what it is, but they will feed it royal jelly, and they will make a different cell. Like I showed you in that video, there was some capped brood, and those are baby bees, just regular baby bees that are just capped right at the cell line. And the queen cell will be, because they feed her royal jelly, she grows much, much larger. I think you could see in that picture, she had a very long abdomen. And so it will look like a peanut almost hanging off of the cell, off of the frames, the honeycomb frames. And so they choose the queen, and they may actually try to produce several queens at one time. And the first queen that is born will go around and kill the other queens and just reign over the hive. But in order to be a successful queen, she also needs to leave the hive and go on a mating flight and come back and be able to continue on laying eggs and continuing on with the colony.
Wow. Thank you. That's a
Rabbi Lynn, there was a question before Joan too. I don't know if
oh,
you
thank you. I didn't see. Thank you.
Okay, is Andy, does Andy Hirschfeld ask the question, is all honey kosher?
Oh, I'm going to refer to Rabbi Elaine or Rabbi Glickman for that. Well, they're both Rabbi Glickmans, but the Glickmans for that. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but I don't know.
It really, yes, honey is kosher. And Brander, what's so interesting about honey? Like the riddle about honey?
Yes. So I invented a riddle, which is that normally in the laws of kashrut, there's kosher animals and unkosher animals, and any product of an unkosher animal is also unkosher. So that if like an unkosher bird, you couldn't eat the eggs of a vulture, but if it is a kosher bird, you could eat those eggs. And there's only 2 exceptions to this rule. And one of the exceptions is a bee's honey, because bees are not kosher. You're not allowed to eat a bee, but you may eat its honey. And there's only one other species that you may not eat, but you may eat something that issues from it.
Yes, but everybody think about it. One other kosher, unkosher animal where the issue is kosher, but let's wait. Everybody have that in the back of your mind, and we'll reveal the answer at the very end. But thank you. Bob, I'm gonna have you look at the chat because I feel like you're finding questions and I'm not. So I can ask you to give the questions. I'd be grateful. Thank you.
No problem. Here's one from Joan. Is the sole purpose of the bees to make honey, or is there another reason to have beehives?
Actually, the purpose of the bees are to pollinate our food supply. That is really, well, in nature, that's their goal. But I guess their goal within the hive would be to reproduce just like every other species. Honey is just a byproduct of what they gather. I mean, it's their food as well. So that's the other thing with my hives is that I do not take all of the honey off of the hives. I don't want to feed them sugar water unless I have to, because I don't think it's the healthiest for them. So primarily it's their food source. So I do leave honey on the hives for them. I only take excess.
How much honey? That was another question along with it. How much honey do you get? So you don't take it all. How much do you get out of a hive?
It varies depending on what's happening in nature. Like this spring, I did not get as much honey because we did not have a lot of rain. We have made up for it since. So this fall is looking very good. But I can get anywhere from, I don't know, maybe on average 60 to 100 pounds of honey in a good year off of the hives. And I have 7 hives, but they are not all honey producing just yet. Some of them are newer hives, and I don't take honey until they're they can sustain themselves.
And another question came through from Cindy. What kind of honey do you produce, and is it for sale? Can we buy it?
I do sell honey. It goes very, very quickly. I should be harvesting honey again in the next month or so. So I'm happy to sell it to anyone that's interested. My hives produce primarily palmetto honey in the spring. And right now they're collecting goldenrod, which they haven't done in the past. So that's kind of new again this season. Everything is changing. I think some of it might be climate, some of it might be the rain. But generally my fall harvest is Brazilian pepper.
That covers the chat questions. So I'm just going to look. If you have a question, either unmute yourself or raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
There was a question in the chat, Lauren. When you got your first hive, how many bees did it come with?
I did not track them because it's very difficult, but I'm going to estimate that there was probably 20 to 30,000 in there in the hive. So imagine that driving down I-75 in the dark in the back of my car, not a truck. So a little harrowing.
Wow. Well, Bob looks to see if there are more questions. I just want to point out we have some great compliments for you in the chat. I just wanted to share from Marnie Mount. My husband is an entomologist and is a huge Save the Bee supporter, as is our family in general. Thank you for your work. From Michelle, I'm so impressed with the bravery involved in having and maintaining beehives. So cool to have this as a hobby. And I think another one might have just come in. How long from when you start a hive, Lynn Carter asked, how long from when you start a hive to when you could harvest the honey?
Again, it depends on really what the nectar flow is and when you start it. You can't really start a hive at any time. You have to start a hive when there are still drones available because you need the males to mate with the queen. But I generally don't take honey for the first year because I think that they need to establish themselves, and only after that will I take excess honey when they produce it. So there does need to be, as you notice the boxes on the hives, I generally will leave one full box of those frames that are full of honey on my hive from season to season, because that's what I have found my hives need to survive. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Here's one I might have missed before from Barbie and Richard. How do your neighbors feel about your hobby?
My hives are not at my house because I am in an HOA in Lakewood Ranch. So I did find a lovely woman who has about 10 acres behind Panther Ridge. So it's East Bradenton. And I put my first hive there and I literally have it there in exchange for honey. So when I do harvest honey, she always gets the first because she is so graciously allowing me to put not one hive, but now I have 7 hives there, and she lets me, she will let me put as many hives there as I'd like. So it's kind of a nice exchange. But I wish I could have them at my house. It would be a lot easier, but I don't have them here.
Well, are there other questions from the chat, or anybody has their hands raised? If not, I can move on to the last part of the conversation with more time for questions at the end.
Here's one I think that we hadn't asked. How do you know what they're gathering? You know, goldenrod versus palmetto. How do you know what the honey is?
Just basically by observation on what's blooming. So certain plants bloom at different times of the year. So it's basically just observation on what's around my hives. So that's how I know. I mean, there's just what's there. Like some people have their hives in orange blossom or orange groves when the orange trees are blossoming. So they'll know primarily what their bees are gathering.
How long do the bees live?
A bee will live, the queen will live a couple of years if she's healthy and has enough to continue producing eggs for the hive. But on average, the regular bees, drone bees, do not live as long because they are removed from the hive in the fall, because they just don't do anything. They don't add anything to the hive during the winter. But a regular bee will live on average 6 weeks, but it depends on how active they are. So during the winter, they will live longer because they're not actually flying far from the hive and they conserve energy and they will live longer. But during nectar flow or the summer, when they are flying and traveling, on average, they live 6 weeks.
Thank you. Let's
And
see.
last one, just kidding. How many hives do you see
Wait,
in your
I'm
future?
sorry, Bob. I
Oh,
saw that one, but I'm going to cut. I'm going to wait.
Okay. Okay.
Because that's going to take us into our
Great.
conclusion. So
Okay.
Dana Rubin, you were prescient and ahead of the game. So I'm going to come to your question at the very end, if that's okay. But I do want to turn our conversation a little bit to just kind of the aspect of the honey harvesting and the high holidays. You've touched a little bit about the different types of honey already, but can you just talk a little bit more about honey in general, about the types of honey that your bees have produced, kind of different variations among the honey, just the different types of honey that you feel like we should know about?
Well, locally that you'll get here in Florida, I mean, mine are palmetto and goldenrod. And somebody asked, I think I forgot to mention when they asked about the different honeys and nectar, the goldenrod has a distinct smell to it. It smells like dirty gym shoes, literally, when I open up my hive. But apparently it tastes really nice, but I've not tasted it yet. So I will let you all know. But in this area, I think this is what you're asking, Rabbi Elaine. And if it's not, I apologize. Redirect me. But we'll have orange blossom. There'll be clover. There'll be palmetto. There'll be mangrove, goldenrod, Brazilian pepper, and probably blueberry and strawberry, if people have those plants around them or those fields around them. Was that what you were asking? I apologize.
That's what I was asking. There was just that awkward pause because I turned my mute on in case, the phone beeped or something, and it took me a second. No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. If you could tell us what kind of extra significance might your work as a beekeeper and honey harvesting, do you feel like it has any extra significance as Rosh Hashanah and the Jewish New Year are approaching?
Absolutely. It actually is one of my goals to have enough honey one of these days. That my honey does sell really fast, and it's probably because I don't produce in mass quantities yet. But it is one of my goals to actually have enough honey that I can sell for Rosh Hashanah, primarily market it to people from Rosh Hashanah. And I know, Rabbi Lane, we have talked about, and I'm going to bring it up again in front of all these people, maybe having the temple have a host hive, if not on the property, somewhere else maybe, that we could use for educational purposes, maybe to Bishvat or Rosh Hashanah and some of those things, as well as maybe sell to temple members. So I'm going to continue that conversation off the Zoom, I think, but it is one of my goals that it would be really nice to be able to give back in that way. One of the things I've found is the educational part with beekeeping, that I really went into it for my own hobby, but I have spoken at the temple before for the religious school, and now this Zoom call, and I've done some other things at Community Day School, and I just really do find that I love the educational part of it. So that and Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah is not Rosh Hashanah without the honey for a sweet new year. So it does go hand in hand.
Beautiful, thank you. And I think you just touched on one of my last questions, which I think was also Dana's question, which is what is next for you as a beekeeper and a honey harvester? You pretty much answered it just in the context of that question, but I just want to make sure that we heard everything. If there's any other plans or anything like that that you want to reveal here, anything that's next.
Well, I don't have plans. Every time I think that I have enough hives, it's almost like a small addiction. And I think, oh, I have enough. It's overwhelming. And then I think, no, maybe I want 1 or 2 more hives. And I have been approached by people to have hives on their property. Not that they necessarily want to be a beekeeper. They just want it because they think it's cool, or they want to support nature. Or, for example, where I have my hives now, she has commented on how beautiful her flowers are now. And And so some people have different, and some people want to learn. So I have been approached by people. I have toyed with the idea of hosting hives if somebody has property and wants a hive there. But again, it's specific because I always put the bees first. I have been approached by somebody on Sneed Island, which is beautiful. And I thought, I would love to go beekeep at Sneed Island and look at the beautiful water while I'm beekeeping. But unfortunately, she had this beautifully landscaped yard. And when she contacted her gardener, he said he uses pesticides that would not be, that would be very harmful to bees. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to put it there. So if anyone's out there that is interested in bees and even just wants to learn more, maybe you have land somewhere and you think you might want to host a hive, I would be interested in just going down that road a little bit.
Excellent.
Just to expand.
Thank you. If people would like to get in touch with Lauren, if you're a Temple member, she's, in your member directory. If you are not, I think pretty much everybody has my email address just from having RSVP'd. So you're also welcome to shoot me an email and I will send it over to her. I'll be your beekeeping agent.
Thanks. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me there. Beekeeping is Queen of the Colony on both Instagram and Facebook. And also real estate is Hive to Home. So both of those, you can get in touch with me. If you can't, I'm sure Rabbi Elaine, she's been wonderful on everything, but if you're on Facebook, please follow me.
Good. Hive to Home.
That's also where you would learn when I have honey, probably first would be Facebook.
Great. Okay, so Queen of the Colony and Hive to Home. Those are your handles?
Those are my handles.
Is that, I don't know if handles is the right word. It just sounded
I know,
so.
I feel like 10-4, good buddy.
Right. I think, oh, my last thing, were there any other facts about bees or bee society that you want to leave us with before we turn it over to questions?
No, I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, I do find them, I just find it fascinating. I mean, I probably could talk about them forever, but I think that I've covered a lot of the fascinating things that stand out to me.
Right. Well,
and people have asked great questions, so I appreciate that too.
Well, you have definitely been fascinating, covered plenty of fascinating things, but I'm afraid we are not quite ready to let you go yet because our Zoom chat has, come alive again. Bob, could I ask you to take over and to share some of the questions with Lauren? And while you're doing that, I'm going to add everybody in the chat. I'm going to put Lauren's, Facebook and Instagram so that you'll have it there if you just want to write it down. I'll have it in the chat. And Bob, if you could ask some questions, that would be great. Thank you so much again, Lauren. This has been fantastic.
Sure.
Thank you for organizing it.
Hopefully I'm not missing anybody's questions here. Here's one from Fred Tebow. Do you have your own centrifuge for getting the honey?
I do have my own extractor. It was purchased last year, so I've only used it once. It was purchased over the winter, so I have just used it on my spring harvest. And I do have a electrical extractor, so it makes it a lot faster and easier to extract the honey.
Okay, I think you've touched on some of this, but not all. Can you explain the process where the bees leave the hive, how far they go, how they get back to the hive when they return?
So bees will travel up to 3 miles from the hive. They will travel closest. They go in search of the nectar source. So if there's something close to the hive, they'll stay close to the hive. If there is nothing, they will expand their circle around the hive. And they find their way back to the hive. Well, one way is by the position of the sun, and they do a waggle dance within the hive, and they communicate to each other based on an intricate dance that they do. And it involves, so they say, I'm not, the entomologist might have a better explanation for this, but they will give the direction of the sun and give information that way to their sisters to go out and forage. And then they, like I have 7 hives, and they know which hive is theirs based on the queen's pheromones. So they are in tune with the queen's pheromones. And that's how they find their way essentially back into the hive. And there are guard bees at the front of the hive that literally check every bee coming in to make sure that they are from that colony.
All right, I'm looking. Andy, I'm going to ask you to, if you can, to unmute yourself. And I see your question here, but it'd probably be easier if you just ask Lauren, the one about near the plant and the
Yeah,
combination.
if you have all different types of plants nearby, how do they know just to go to the magnolia or go to the blueberries? Will they ever mix? Or part of them will go to blueberries, part will go to something else? Or or they have a meeting in the morning and the queen says, only go here? How do you?
Well, that's when you get wildflower, because it's a mixture of things. And so if there's a lot of things blooming in one area, it would just be considered probably wildflower blend. But the bees will actually congregate. They will, if blueberries, let's say for an example, are in bloom, the blueberry plants, they will primarily go to those blueberry plants, and that is communicated. I don't know if it's a morning meeting, but it is a meeting like the waggle dance and that I had explained, and they will fill the cells of a honeycomb with primarily the same source if there is a large amount of that source available. And when that source dries up, they will move on to another frame and start with a different source. If there's just a little bit of everything, it becomes wildflower, and they do it out of necessity, just gather nectar.
They'll have grapefruit and whatever. They'll have, fruit trees and whatever else is out there.
Whatever's out there. I mean, so it depends on where the hive is located.
And they don't mess with humans in general. They just go on to their work.
They really don't, despite how people have fear of them. They really don't. Their goal is not to go out and sting people. Only if they feel threatened will they sting.
All right, thanks.
Others either
You're
raise your
welcome.
hand. A lot of compliments, by the way. Okay, Marnie, I see your hand. I'm going to try to unmute you. I can't.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm the one with the husband who's an entomologist. So he was like piping in and all that. And he said, it's a great presentation. He said, the royal jelly is sometimes what they feed the queen, it's called, he thinks.
Yeah.
So apropos for her, she gets her royal jelly. And yes, the wiggle waggle dance, the waggle dance is basically when we say turn left at the light and turn right or whatever, they're doing their dance and showing their friends where to go. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So we love bees. We've saved many, we'll know to call you next time. We've saved many hives from our backyard and brought them
I love that. Yes, please call me, and I would love to hear more about his knowledge too. He could probably teach me a lot.
My husband talk about that. Yeah.
Joan, I'm sorry. Joan, I saw your hand. I'm not sure I can unmute you. I'm trying. Joan, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, good. I didn't know I was going to do that. I was wondering if I have a flower garden, like an English flower garden in my back of my home. And I do get a lot of bees around it. Are they coming from somebody's hives, or are they just coming from heaven? I don't know.
I don't know.
Now I'm thinking, where are these bees coming from? And where are they
going?
There
are bees everywhere. I mean, they may be just naturally in nature, or
so they don't necessarily.
You might have a neighbor that has a hive. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
not all bees are, in people's hives. There are a lot that are in nature. There are, there's no way to really tell.
Yeah.
Unless you
I was
knew.
just wondering if somebody around here had hives that they would be coming from, which might.
It's possible. It's very possible.
Thank you so much. So interesting.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Ed, I think you had your hand up. Yeah. I'm not able to unmute you. I'm not sure why. I'm clicking on you. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I have a question. How much time do you spend on your hobby?
Well, it depends on what I'm doing in the hive, and going back to the new year and what we talked about a little bit before, I always go into my hives with an intention. So it might be to do an inspection. It might be to add a honey super if they're collecting nectar. It might be to split a hive because I don't want them to swarm. So it depends on what I'm doing, but I do only go generally one every week or every 10 days. With the rain we've been having, it's probably 2 weeks now before I'm going to my hives. But when I'm there, I generally, time just disappears. So I'm there usually for an hour and a half to 2 hours generally.
Is that year round?
It is year round. I overheat really easily. So I have learned that in the summer, I go in the mornings and I really don't do as much inspecting. I'm there no more than an hour, hour and a half. In the wintertime, when it's cold, I don't open up my hives if it goes under 70 degrees. So, and there's not much happening there. I just make sure that there's a lot of observation from the outside, and only if there was something that seemed alarming would I go into my hives, probably in the winter. But I do go to check on them, make sure that I will open them up to make sure that they still have honey stores and they're not starving to death and things like that. But not as much in the wintertime. Spring and fall are probably my busiest seasons.
If you were keeping bees in Michigan, like you referred to, what would you do in the wintertime?
They have to close up their hives. A lot of times they have to put moisture wraps on them. They have to put sugar, I forget what you call them, but they have to make like sugar patties for the hive and make sure that the hive has enough resources if they don't keep enough honey on there to make it through the winter so that the bees don't have to leave. But they do have to worry about the moisture level, because the bees really do produce a lot of heat within their hive. So I am not proficient on other areas. I am kind of glad that we're here in Florida. My sister-in-law has taken up beekeeping since I have introduced her to it. She lives in Portland, Oregon area, and this is her first year. So I will probably learn a little bit more about that, because she will be having to prepare her hives for the winter. So I'm interested to find out how that goes. So that's a great question.
Thank you all so much. I feel we're getting, it's about 5 after 8. So I want to make sure that anyone who has additional questions that we get a chance to ask. And I also want to make sure that we get a little bit of time to, to socialize a bit too. Bob, were there more questions in the chat or more people who've been raising their hands?
No, I think I got, wait a second. Here's one that came in. How do you know about how to get rid of a subterranean yellow jacket nest?
Well, it's funny that you asked that. I'm not about yellow jackets, but I actually was called out to somebody's house because they thought they had a beehive. And when I got there, it was underground, and I had a feeling it wasn't bees, but I didn't want him to necessarily go near it, and it was yellow jacket. And so I don't know if I got rid of it for them. He had to call a pest control company, but he did have a wasp spray. And so since I had my gear with me, I had my veil and everything else, I sprayed it for him before I left. But I would say call a pest control company and get rid of those yellow jackets, because they're nasty, even though I do believe in bees. But yellow jackets don't really offer you anything other than pain.
There's definitely different. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being with us. I'm just applause. Thank you so much for sharing your hobby and for sharing your expertise with us, and for being just so forthcoming and informative and delightful. I'm going to switch us to gallery view for just a minute. I'd like to take a photo if I could. So I'm going to ask anybody, if you, when I count to 3, if you would do a thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, a thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, thumbs up. And whoop, I just turned my panel on wrong because I hit the wrong thing. All right, I'm not in charge of Zoom. All right, 1, 2, 3, thumbs up again. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren, for being here. And thank you, Bob, for guiding us so beautifully through the video. And it's just been a really, really special night. Shana Tova to everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we'll conclude with a personal testimony from Dana Rubin. Thank you for the presentation, Lauren. I can attest that her honey is amazing, and I promise I won't buy her out. Maybe. So good.
Dana is one of my biggest purchasers. She is wonderful.
Good. Thank you all so much. It's been great seeing everyone. Shana Tova, if people want to unmute themselves and, stick around and talk for a little bit, I'm happy to keep the Zoom room open. Otherwise, we will see you on Friday night for Rosh Hashanah. Happy, healthy Shana Tova. And Lauren, thank you again. Bob, thank you again.
My
Thanks,
pleasure,
Bob.
and thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks for the idea doing this, Elaine.
Oh, it was great.
I'm going to go with
Thank
that.
you, Elaine. It was wonderful. So
Oh,
interesting.
thank you. I actually did nothing, but I will gladly take the thank you because, that's just nice of
But
you.
you had to ask her.
Hmm?
She did a lot. Don't
I guess
get me
that's why I
wrong.
asked her,
She
so-
did a lot.
So,
Elaine,
yeah.
your husband said that the bee is unkosher, but we're allowed to eat
Oh.
the honey.
Oh my
And there
gosh,
was,
I forgot. Yes. Anybody want to raise their hand and come up with the other
Oh.
answer? What
And I
is
know he did this on Friday night at a sermon. I can't remember the answer.
a being that is non-kosher, but the issue it produces, food it produces is kosher? Something you can't eat, but you can eat what it produces. Barbie got it. Everybody look in the chat. Barbie and Richard to everyone. The answer,
Mother's milk.
mother's milk.
Oh.
So that's
Okay.
it. Mother's milk and bees. So that is it. Thank you for reminding me, Bob. Let everybody go and only
was
Bobby,
Debbie.
only
Thank you,
Barbie
Debbie.
would have known the response.
Right. And people are limited. All right.
Well, I'm going to wish everyone a good evening and close up Shana Tova. We'll see you
Shana
Friday
Tova.
night. Bob, thank you again. And Lauren, thank you again. This was wonderful. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Elaine.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Bob.
Thank you very much.
Good night,
Good
Bob.
night.